Anyway, so this is going to be a recap of my talk from yesterday afternoon. As it says, my name is Jonathan Naylor, G4KLX. This is a talk at Pacificon 2018. A little bit about me. I was born in 1964. I was licensed at the age of 14, which at the time was the youngest you could be licensed in the UK. That has now changed. You could be licensed as I think you could be licensed as a fetus these days, but in those days it was 14, so I actually had to wait to get licensed and take the exam. And I did my Morse test in 1980 and got my G4, which in those days the licenses have all changed now. A G8 was 2 meters and upwards. We had no 6 meters in those days. And then my G4 call sign is essentially the full license, all bands, all powers, blah blah blah, no restriction. Something I'll drop in here is that when I first started going to radio clubs in the UK in about 1976, when I was 11 years old or something, I was the youngest member of the club. Not a big surprise there, because they all looked very old to me. If I go to a radio club in the UK now, I'm now 53, I am still the youngest member of the radio club. I mean, we can laugh about it, but it is actually quite sad if you think about it. But it's just the way it is. In fact, the other day, 2 years ago, I went to a rally in the UK, which was a fairly rubbish rally, really. And there was a couple of, I think there were M1 call signs, which are maybe 20 years old. And they got some old radios from the early 1980s, which, you know, sort of radios that at the time I would have sold body parts to have, because they were lovely radios at that time. So I looked at one of these, it was like £10 or something. I said, oh, I would have loved to have, you know, bought one of them, but I've got no use for it now. I'd love to buy it, but what would I do with it? It would just sit on a shelf and gather dust. And this guy went, oh, and he looked at my call sign and says, oh, is that a reissue? And I said, no. I went, ooh, know your place. I've been licensed almost 40 years, mate. You know, don't talk crap to me. Anyway, so I got my Class A, which meant I could do HF. So if anybody remembers, there was a Sunspot Cycle Peak 7980. It was a particularly excellent one. I think it was Cycle 21, can't remember. Very, very good. And so I worked the world on HF. It's great. I had a wire antenna in the bedroom, just above my head, running a pair of 6146s with borrowed equipment. Probably caused me untold damage internally, but who cares? And I remember before going to school, I'd go on, say, 10 meters, and I'd practically work all continents before going to school. Of course, I went to school and I told the CBers there, and they went, oh, yeah, we've got 20 decibel gain whip antennas at home, we don't need to do that nonsense. But I thought, hang on, if I could work all continents before I go to school in the morning, where's the challenge? I don't know, I like challenges in my life. So I went on to VHF, UHF, SHF, had a very good location. I had the first QSO between Britain and Lithuania on 70 centimetres, CW, which I obviously still have, and worked some very, very good DX. I was a member of a VHF, UHF contest group, very successful one, in fact the most successful one that Britain's ever had. And to bring us into the world of the digital world, I started on AX25 in 1987. Now, I jump forward here. I'd like to add briefly that in about 1988, one of my friends who lived nearby was G8 BPQ. Does anybody know BPQ code? Yeah, somebody's nodding. He's a good friend of mine, John Wiseman. And I actually wrote the display code for that in assembler. Well, I put it this way, I replaced his display code, and that became the standard. Anyway, so much and so forth. I drifted in and out of amateur radio, moved house, various nonsense. Lived in Belgium and Switzerland, became HB9 DRD, or if you live in Switzerland, it's Harby Noon DRD. Operated on 6 and 3 centimetres, worked range scatter. What is probably most relevant, during my time in Switzerland, I wrote an open source version of JT44 and FSK 441, which were the new singing or dancing Reek signal modes on VHF from Joe Taylor, who I'm sure you've come across, K1JT, Nobel Prize winner as well. And by my writing a completely independent open source version based on DSP techniques, which I was self-taught, so I got lots of spare time, it actually made Joe, within a relatively short period of time, actually open source his code. Because although my code might not have been as good, and it certainly didn't do JT65, which came along fairly quickly, it did actually give him the impetus to open it. And of course, since then, lots of people have been involved, although not me, I must say, and it's actually become very, very successful because of that. And I can't help feeling it's the open sourcing from him that's allowed all these extra modes, JT8, JT9, and all sorts of strange things going off at the moment. Whisper, yeah, I think that's part of it as well, isn't it? So I returned to the UK in 2008, and I wanted a new challenge in terms of amateur radio and in other ways. In 2009, I went back to university. I thought, what the hell, go and do a master's. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that was not just because I wanted to go back to university, it was because although I taught myself digital signal processing, which is a fantastic subject, it really is mind-boggling, I had no formal education in it. It was purely self-taught, and it turned out I had a few misconceptions, but I wanted to learn it properly. I wanted to sit down, listen to a lecturer, get thoroughly confused, and get a piece of paper at the end of it as well. And so I did that for a year. Believe me, my mind was blown on more than one occasion. Anyway, just before I went back to university, I thought, oh, I want to try something new in amateur radio. I've done HF, I've done VHF, I've done microwaves, I've done weak signal, I've done FM repeaters, I've done moon bounce even, although that's from a friend's house. I wanted to do something different, and at the time there was an article, I think, in Radcom, the Irish GB magazine, saying, D-Star, digital voice. I thought, that looks interesting. So I got a second-hand ID IC91, and what I found disturbed me. I put it on, it was fantastic. I heard mobile stations, there was no flutter. It was just incredible. It was, like a different world. It didn't actually matter what was happening to them, it just sounded the same. Unless they sound like R2-D2, of course, which sometimes they did. But what worried me about it was not that, it was not the technical side, that was straightforward. What worried me is that what I saw was a part of the hobby where there was no room for homebrew. It was all commercial. Your repeater was ICOM, an ICOM stack, 2m77s, 23 whatever. The software was G2, supplied by ICOM. Robin Cutshaw had obviously written his D+ stuff, which I suppose is sort of homebrew, but generally speaking it was closed. It was like a package. You install this, you got D-Star. And I thought, hang on, where's the hobby? It could be just a commercial piece of equipment. That's not good. Let's open it up. Let's do something. And so, based on the DSP stuff I'd learnt, although this was pre-university, I thought, how hard can it be to make a? Oh, it's not that bad. How hard is it to do a sound card-based repeater? Because conceptually, it's not a difficult problem, because the output of your discriminator is a representation of the frequency shift keying, which is what GMSK is. The Gaussian is just the shape, it's still frequency shift keying at the bottom line. So once you've got over that, you've got your discriminator coming out with this, and you send back, essentially 2 voltages, although it is shaped, and you've got FSK coming out, boom, boom. So I wouldn't say it was a breakthrough moment, but it drove me forward to actually write my first D-Star repeater. And at the same time, I also wrote an FM repeater controller, because it seemed to me that if you wanted to run D-Star, most repeaters were still FM, of course, in those days. I didn't want people to say, or to say to them, you've got to run D-Star. I wanted to be able to say, you can run D-Star and you can run FM. So I wrote a matching FM repeater software that had the power to be able to tell the D-Star side to shut up when it was busy, and vice versa. If D-Star was active, it could tell the FM repeater to shut up, not send beacons or anything like that. So I wrote these 2 in parallel. And the first implementation, or the first operational version, was GB3IN in August 2009. Unfortunately, it is actually closed down at the moment due to abuse, but that's a separate issue. It's a great shame. A short while later, I managed to integrate the software with Scott KI4L KF's Open G2, which was literally just a clone of ICOM's G2, with all the good and the bad about it. Towards the end of 2010, I was approached by a German group to say, hey, ICOM G2 is all very well, but it's a bit shit. And it is. The whole point with G2 was, if you keyed up on a repeater, it would send a signal to a central server saying, this person is at this repeater. The central server would make a note of that saying, okay, he was there, he's now there, okay. It would then tell the other repeaters in the world where you were. So that if somebody wanted to call you directly, it would know exactly where to send the message to. Which sounds great. The problem is, ICOM G2 takes minutes to do this. It's awful, it's rubbish. Minutes. Now, if you're a mobile station, especially if you're in maybe a built-up or a hilly area, you might be changing repeaters more often than that, potentially. And if it takes minutes, it becomes useless. You know, it's sort of like, you know, I'm going to another repeater, I'll see you in 5 minutes when G2 catches up. And these German guys said, you know, conceptually it's great, but it can be done so much better. So they used IRC, the chat system, the old internet chat system, as the basis of their protocol. And their system essentially mimicked G2, except for the fact that the update time was measured in seconds. As soon as somebody turned up on another repeater, the rest of the world would know about it within seconds. Absolutely brilliant. And it's much, much better, much more efficient as well in many ways. And that was very successful. When I first wrote it, I made sure it supported my hardware, of course, the homebrew, which at this time also supported GMSK modems and other hardware, not just sound cards. And also it supported D+ and D extra reflectors. I made off the D+, because I hadn't met Robin at this stage, I made sure it looked exactly the same as DVAR. So that if you wanted to block it, you'd end up blowing up all the DVARs as well, which were quite dominant at the time, which I thought was quite clever, really. And the development of that continued until about 2014. When I say that, it hasn't stopped, but my full-scale, full-on development to the exclusion of everything else, like life, continued until about 2014. And during that time, I did layers and layers of nonsense to the software. DCS, not nonsense, that's not nonsense. CCS, DRATS, DD mode, that's the digital data mode on 23 centimeters. And much else. And I say much else because I really actually can't remember what I added, but I did add the kitchen sink. Now then, I see Joey sitting over here. We're going to get a mention now, I'm afraid. I went to Dayton in 2014. First time I've been to an amateur radio show in the States. In fact, it's the first and only time I've been to Dayton, it has to be said. And when I was there, I saw Joey, and he very, very kindly let me have a CS700. Along the lines of, here's CS700, can you do DMR? And the answer was, yes sir, I think I can. So I had the CS700, I had the ability to transmit and receive DMR, and sure enough, I set the code plug up in UK and I could hear DMR repeaters and work through them. And I thought, oh, this is rather exciting, it's rather excellent. At the same show, you know, full of myself now, oh, DMR, that's the next, you know, that's the next mountain to climb. I went to see the DMR Mark people, and I had a bit of a shock. I went up to them with my call sign badge on, and they went, "Oh, Jonathan, we love your software. We run your D-Star stuff. We run D-Star repeater, IRC Gateway. We love your open source. It works so well on our repeaters." And so I said, "Oh, that's good. I'm glad you like it. You know, it's quite successful. I'm going to do DMR. You know, could I interface into your network, please?" "Oh, no. No, it's got to be Motorola. No, not having any homebrew, no Hytera, no, can't have that." And it's like, you're not getting the point here. You know, I didn't actually give them a history lesson, but I thought about this. The history lesson here is, when I did my software for D-Star, the dominant network was ICOM G2, with maybe I think 400 or 500 repeaters. With the IRC Gateway, we had well over 1,000 repeaters within a year. Who's laughing? Who became the dominant network? It was not ICOM, because it's closed. It still is closed to this day. You know, you cannot put my stuff onto the ICOM network directly. It's still closed. There's a story there, isn't there? A closed system in the face of an equivalent open system will never win. And these guys sounded their death knell, and I knew it. And to be honest, if they studied their history, they would know it too. So I left their stand fuming, to be perfectly honest, and I think I had a good chew at John, K7VE, about that, and he just went, whatever. So I started planning to build a DMR repeater. But the problem is, first of all, DMR is not simple. It's not like D-Star. It's time division multiple access. And that means you've got to synchronize your transmitters and receivers in a way that we amateurs just do not do. Amateur, the HF data mode, requires a certain amount of synchronization, but the synchronization is in a matter, I think, 100 milliseconds or something. With this TDMA, I am synchronizing to steps of 1/24th of a millisecond. Yeah, and it's good enough. It's possibly might be able to go a bit further, but you certainly could not go to 1 millisecond. That would be too much. I think you could probably go to 1/10th of a millisecond if you wanted to. But we are talking timing of a level that we are not used to. And it's an interesting challenge. However, as it says at the bottom, real life intervened. So I was all getting ready to do what would become the MMDVM, although to be fair, looking back, I hadn't got my ideas fully formulated in my head. But things changed, and one of the outcomes is on my finger here. Absolutely nothing to do with amateur radio, but an awful lot of fun. Anyway, wind forward. Spring 2015. The first thing along the line is that Gus, I'm sure you know Gus from DV Mega fame, he sent me a beta firmware for DMR for his board. Now this wasn't a hotspot firmware, it was just to display and interpret DMR. It was just a play thing really, but I played with that for a while and gave him some feedback. So obviously he was going in that direction. In support of this, I started writing a piece of software called DMR Interface, which was literally just a thing that would talk to a modem and do all the hard work of the packet encapsulation, stripping off and things like that. I wrote all that based on the specification to go with potentially some firmware from Gus, but Gus was having problems for various reasons getting it to work reliably. So I'd written this interface, and in fact, just fast forwarding, this software that I wrote then is actually the basis of the DMR code that's actually in MMDVM now. It was certainly not wasted anyway. What really changed it for me in terms of my development was an article in May 2015 Radcom, written by a guy called Barry Chambers, J-A-G-U, I know, A-G-N, sorry. Very, very clever guy. I think he's a retired lecturer from Sheffield University. Be that as it may, it was an article in Radcom, and this man had got an Arduino Due. He was using the analog to digital converter, feeding in audio from a radio, and on the back of it he'd got some sort of display, TFT, LCD, I can't remember. The detail is unimportant. What was important is he was interpreting audio, he was doing DSP on it, he was running an FFT, and he was producing waterfalls on this screen. I looked at this, and bear in mind the interface was just a matter of some low pass filters, nothing clever. I looked at this and I thought, yes, this is the way to go. This is an embedded platform. It's not an operating system. It's not like Windows or Linux or anything like that. This is hard real time. We've got a fast processor, not massively expensive, and it's capable of doing that. If it can do that, it can do D-Star. In fact, it might be able to do DMR. And this is probably about the time I sent the email that you mentioned, Jim, probably around that time, because I suddenly got very excited. It's like, this is it. This is the light bulb moment. This is the way to go. Embedded hardware, and then feeding some other hardware to do the other work, which is now usually done on a Pi. But this embedded bit was the key. Something that could run really quickly under complete control. At the same time, I did actually find an article on the internet from some M0 where he'd also taken an Arduino Due. He was feeding audio in, he was taking audio out, that's another important step, and he got a variable resistor on the other channel of the analog to digital converter, and it was basically a variable bandwidth CW filter. Ding! Yet again, he's doing interesting stuff, audio in, audio out, the sort of thing I want, and it worked. Going back to DMR, as you probably know, it's an ETSI standard, so it's extremely well documented down to the nth degree. And as serendipity would have it, I started a new contract in spring 2015 where I had to live away from home when I was working during the week, just returning at weekends. And this meant I had spare time, so I'd do my 7.5, 8 hours per day. In Britain, we don't work massive hours. Well, I don't anyway. If you get 2 hours out of me every day, you're lucky, to be perfectly honest, but I do attend for 7.5 hours. People say, where do you work? I say, no, I attend, I don't work. And so I was living away from home during the week. Where I was staying was in the middle of nowhere. It was delightful. You could hear the owls and various wild animals at night. But there was no internet. There was no mobile phone coverage. I had spare time without disruption, and I had a project. And that is really bad news, because it meant that I would go to work, come back to the digs, have a nice drink of tea. I don't work without tea, okay? I'm powered by tea. Although when I'm here, I'm powered by coffee, but tea is my poison of choice, or beer. But it meant I got time. And I used to do 5 or 6 hours in the evening. on this every night, or well, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday anyway. And then I'd get home on a Friday, my wife would say, "You look really tired, you're working too hard." So I kept that up for, I think, 19 months, which is something I really can't recommend. But what came out of it? Well, first of all, I had a D-Star. D-Star's trivial, to be perfectly honest, as a protocol. It really is. I'd already done the work for the most part. So it's a matter of taking my existing work, stripping a load of stuff out, for example, things like kitchen sinks, simplifying it, putting it in the modem. Well, hey, we got D-Star. That was easy. Then came DMR. At the same time, I updated the protocol specification to go from the modem to what became the MMDVM host, and Gus followed that with his DV Mega. That's why he's always been compatible with my work. He was involved in that from an early time. And also at the same time, I created an open protocol for DMR to go from homebrew to a network. Now, I created this protocol in association with the DMR Plus team, but ironically, by the time my hardware and software became available, it was actually Brandmeister who took it up. The DMR Plus team waited, I think, another 6 months to implement it, which I always found a bit bizarre, but hey-ho. Right, the first release of my software, and of course the, I think it was 1.0 board, wasn't it, around that time, was in January 2016. That's actually when it was all pushed to GitHub for the first time, although some of the software was about 6 months old by then, but that's when it first became publicly available. And we found a problem. We found a problem very early on. You transmit to it on DMR, it works. And as you transmit, the bit error rate would go up, then it would go down. It would go up, it would go down. And the reason was, and to be honest, both of us should probably realize this, DMR requires highly accurate oscillators. You know, not only am I sampling at 24,000 times a second, it's got to be an accurate 24,000 times a second. It can't just be within a percentage. And because it wasn't accurate, it meant that this clock between the radio, which is accurate, all DMR radios are accurate, and the modem, which was definitely not accurate, was drifting. Hence, it would get worse, resynchronize, get worse, resynchronize. And that is why on early ones there was actually a separate TC Expo board brought out extremely quickly by Jim. You needed it, you plugged it in, recompiled, and suddenly it was great. And that is why, although there's no pictures in my slides, because I don't like pictures, I like words, that is why all modems for MMDVM, no matter where they come from, are clocked with TCXOs so that the sample rate is fixed and is accurate. And so this problem that we had in the early days has basically died. But we didn't know that. We literally had to put it on live on air before we went, oh, there was a problem here, Houston. We've got to do something. As I mentioned when Jim was talking, I actually got my, although 2016, January 2016 was DMR and D-Star, I'd actually got a System Fusion radio by this stage, I think in October 2015. So next thing to do was System Fusion. Now, Yaesu done a fairly good job of documenting System Fusion. The problem is they did not document wires X. No surprise there, I suppose. And so getting the main audio through was actually quite a trivial operation. Actually working with wires X was an absolute pig. Luckily there was a guy in Switzerland who was actually doing, I think, a dissertation on System Fusion, I'm not sure, but he sent me lots and lots of traces and it interpreted all the bits and bytes, or some of them anyway. So that is why my software, right from the get-go, actually supports wires X. And when I say that, I don't mean the Yaesu wires X network. That is closed, I've no access to that. But it does mean at least you can get your radio, you can press the wires X button, you will get your menu, you get your list, you can choose, it works. And that's great, that's what I wanted. Okay. Well, unfortunately, because the Yaesu system is closed, I had to create my own network, which I didn't want to do. I really, really didn't want to have to do that, but Yaesu were not, at least at that time, and probably still not now, they were not amenable to interfacing into their network, and that's the way it stays now. So I had to create my own network. And early this year, I got an email from Torsten, DG1HT, with information to how to interface into his FCS network, which is what the DV4 minis use. So that has been added as of April this year, I think it was. Anyway, towards the end of 2016, unexpectedly, I got another 6 months at my contract. I'm not complaining because it paid really well. And I got this spare time, and in my original thoughts I thought, I'd like to do P25, but as you may or may not know, P25 is unknown in Europe. It is not used, end of story. It is just not used. It is an American and to a lesser extent Australian protocol. It is not used in Europe. We've got a thing called Tetra. So getting the radios is like hen's teeth because we have no surplus market for P25. So on my list, I put out a message saying, I'd love to do P25, but could somebody send me a radio, please? You send me a radio, you get P25. And Ian, VK2HK, I must say, I'm very grateful to him. He sent me a XTS 3000 with charger, and in fact, he even set up a code plug for me. So I never actually updated the code plug. And he sent me a radio, completely set up, right frequencies for what I was using. And so I was able to start on P25. Like DMR, because P25 is a commercial standard, it is very, very well documented by TIA, although the document's not so public, but if you know where to look on the internet, it's all there. Yet again, the network protocol was not documented. I'll rephrase that. The network protocol is documented. It's documented in excruciating detail. The problem is, it is not the network protocol used on Quantars, at least not in the amateur service anyway. It's a different protocol. So yet again, I had to reverse engineer that, work out what the bytes are and what the bits do. And even to this day, I don't know what everything does, but I understand enough of it to be interoperable. And that's important. Does it work with a Quantar? Yes, it does. Yet again, I wanted to use the P25 Nx network by David, NX4Y. Things were going swimmingly. We were getting ready to put MMDVMs on their network. And a member of the MMDVM community, who is very well known, really, really pissed him off. And he claimed he was doing it on my behalf, which really annoys me. I've now banned that person. Unfortunately, he keeps sneaking back in. No names, but if you talk to me privately, I'll tell you who it was. But he went around saying, I'm representing Jonathan, and he just pisses people off. And so we are not a member of P25NX, and that is a great shame. It's not of my doing. But I do get on well with David, NX4Y. I did apologise for this person's behaviour, and to make up for it, I actually bought a radio off him. So, there's a pause in my life here. At this stage, this contract finished. I moved back home. Well, hey, back home, yeah, surrounded by children and responsibility and things. You know, get home in the evenings, and instead of being able to play radios, I've actually got to do things like vacuum and wash up and talk to people, watch television, or maybe not so bad. But I had to do real life again, and I don't do real life. I'm a radio amateur, I'm a geek. I want to sit in the corner in the dark, doing things that people don't understand, and they call me freak. I'm okay with that. Anyway, but however, I did find enough time to create a thing called the Dmr Gateway, which is actually one of my happiest creations, actually. As you know, DMR, like most of amateur radio, is political. D-Star's political, DMR's political, System Fusion, less so, thankfully. But DMR is political. You've got Brandmeister, DMR Mark, DMR Plus, and they hate each other. Now, DMR Mark, for the most part, have become irrelevant, so we can forget about them. Let's take them out of the equation, because they're Motorola only. They're dead. As I predicted, they're fools. However, Brandmaster and DMR Plus do not get on. I was at Friedrichshafen 2 years ago. They were both there, both sets of developers, and you should have heard the insults. We are not talking nice. They do this, or did. I think they've actually talked to each other now. The insults between them were amazingly unpleasant. You know, it would have, if they were younger, there would probably been a physical fight, and there probably would have been police called. You know, the dislike between those two groups was immense. I've never seen anything like it. I was sort of in the middle because, although from the technical point of view, I tend to lean towards Brandmeister. I think technically they're the better of the networks. As such, I am non-aligned. I am myself. And also, to some extent, I want to make them a bit scared of me. You know why? Because if they're playing politics, I can just turn around and say, shut up. You know, why are you here? Why are you big? How many repeaters on your network are mine? Oh, 1,500. That's nice. How many of them are Motorola? Oh, 500. How many high tiers? 500. So, yeah. Do you want to piss me off, mate? Do you want your network to die? Oh, how many hotspots are on your network that are MMDVM based? 6,000? What happens if they disappear? What network have you got then? behave. I'm not sure I've been totally successful at that, but that's the idea. Yeah?
I have a question about the utility of P25 phase 1 was never going to be interoperable with current 25 used by everybody here. Government agencies.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, can you just repeat it yourself, please? Yeah.
I'm just curious, suspicious that Jonathan arises to challenges just because they're in the road in front of them about the utility of P25 phase 1 in our world where every agency we work with isn't going to be using phase 1.
But the agencies are commercial or federal.
Well, they're government, that's worse.
This is amateur only. I don't care what they use.
That's a great answer.
No, seriously, I don't. Because my software, I specifically says in the license, is not for commercial work, and that includes federal. I have been approached by FEMA to use my software for P25 repeaters for FEMA.
Oh.
Yeah, this is going back 2 years, maybe. The thing is, though, I regretfully had to say no. I mean, I'm in favour of what they do. I know there's lots of politics, and I don't claim to understand your political shenanigans, shall we say. We only get the tip of it in the UK, in the same way you don't understand all the nonsense that's going off in the UK. So ultimately, but the reason I said no was nothing to do with politics. It's simply because P25, like DMR, is Motorola's playground. And I do not want to tweak the dragon's tail. Simple as that. It's protecting you lot, to be honest. It's protecting you lot. And to be honest, I don't want subpoenas. I don't want bits of paper through the post with lawyers' names on them. I want it all to be above board. In the amateur domain, I do not want to tread on any commercial feet. That is not why I'm here. It's not why you're here either. You just want to play with this stuff, nice and innocent-like. Yeah?
So enrich the amateur experience.
Yeah. So the fact that P25 phase 1 is actually a very old protocol now. So what? It's actually what? The fun. I like P25. It's got shortcomings. I'm actually writing a document at home going through each of the protocols from the pure technical point of view, not political, pointing out the pros and cons of each. One day I'll even finish it, and I think you'll find it quite interesting. P25 doesn't come out of it very well, but it's still a lovely protocol. Anyway, so what I did, I came up with the DMR Gateway, and the idea behind that was you, the sysop, could run this bit of software, and you, the sysop, or your users, could determine where they wanted to talk. I want to talk on Brandmeister on time slot 1, but I want to talk to DMR Plus on time slot 2, and you can do that. Or you can remap it so that Brandmeister, I think, is it 3100? Is that the talk group for US on for DMR? I think so. I mean, we don't use your stuff. But you can remap it. You know, it's 3100. I want it on talk group 9. I don't want it on 3100. DMR Gateway, down to talk group 9. Oh, they're using talk group 8. Don't like talk group 8. It's full of rubbish. It's off. It's not going to get through your repeater. So the whole point of DMR Gateway was to give you the sysop control over these networks. You can tell the networks what to do and where to do it, and never come back again. It gives you the control, because what I do not like about DMR, and this is a hangover from the commercial world, and so it's not really a criticism in that sense, it's very centralized. You've got the masters, and that is where all the decisions are made. The repeater is relatively stupid in that sense. What comes out from the master, you transmit. What you transmit goes to the master without much interpretation. With DMR Gateway, it gives you the power back. Okay, it gives you some of the power you have on, for example, D-Star. Everywhere else, only minor improvements. But 2017, for me, was an epiphany year, because that's when the hotspots started to take over the world. Before then, if you wanted to use my software, you had to use a real radio, be it duplex or simplex. But the hotspots came along. Little things like this that sat on top of Raspberry Pi Zeros and gave you all the modes, and it was like, well, the exact words are not going to repeat, but it was hell. I didn't see that coming. If I had, I would have certainly made some different decisions about my design, but, you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Oh, another thing, I bought a beautiful radio called a Kenwood Nx 5300 from David, NX4Y, which does FM, DMR, NXDN and P25 all in one radio. It's lovely. Full commercial spec, it's not amateur. It's not built as well as an XTS 3000, but it is a lovely radio and fits in your hand nicely. But it's not cheap. I think the base radio is $1,000. Oh, it gets better. With that, you get FM and NXDN. Woo, great. You want DMR? $10. It's just a license key, it's not hardware. You've got DMR. Oh, I want P25. $700, please. Yeah. Okay. I bought mine second hand. Yeah, bought mine second hand. And it also included front panel programming, high capacity battery, Bluetooth. I think my package is probably worth over $2,000. I didn't pay that.
Generic Bluetooth, you can use it with any?
I use it for programming it, but it is also for audio as well. But yeah, so if I do a code plug, it just sits near my Windows PC, just say program it, it just goes Bluetooth connecting and it's done. My THD74 does the same thing, by the way. Anyway, so I've got the NX5300. But you see, there's something important here. Now, I didn't actually want this when I got it, but it came free. Okay? So when I first programmed it, it did FM, DMR, and P25. Hunky-dory. Beautiful. Oh, guess what? I've got another contract in 2018, and I have to work away from home again. Yeah! Oh, sorry. Oh, dreadful, dreadful. I've got to be away from my dear wife and children. So I was working away from home, but unlike the last time, I had internet access. A mobile phone worked. It was great. I was connected to the real world, which made life an awful lot easier, so I could actually set up my hotspots in the corner and talk to people instead of using it theoretically. And so I thought, what do I need to do? What mode is there left to do? NXDN. So my radio had an XDN. I programmed it. I implemented it. It worked very well. The problem is there are two versions of NXDN and I chose the wrong one. Of course, there's no NXDN in the UK, you see, so I have no reference. There's NXDN 9600, NXDN 4800. 9600 is what I did. Brilliant. Everybody else uses 4800. The bad news was it meant I have to do new filters for the digital signal processing. And this meant that the dear old Arduino Duo ran out of steam. It didn't run out of memory, it literally ran out of CPU because there's another set of filters going off there and it couldn't keep up, unfortunately. So at this stage, I wouldn't say goodbye Arduino Duo, but it does mean that I would not recommend it as a choice of a platform. Although that's helped because they actually discontinued it in 2012 anyway, so that makes life easier. I use the ICOM repeater protocol as a basis for the internal connections so that it interoperates. And unlike P25, it does connect into the existing NX core network for NXDN. Now, the hotspot for NXDN is Florida and the northeast of the USA, Maine, places like that. But it's, it's worldwide. NXDN equipment is available in Europe, unlike P25. It's just a commercial protocol. Oops. Okay, we're almost there, almost finished. We can get to the interesting stuff in a sec. I went to Ham Radio May, June, and when I was there, I saw POCSAG in operation. Do you know what POCSAG is? It is. Do you know what the PO stands for? Post Office. Which post office? The British Post Office. Amazingly, I didn't know that myself. It's actually designed by the British, my lot, although back in the 1970s when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And I saw this in operation and it was really cool. They were getting DX spots, weather reports and all sorts of things going on. I thought, this looks great. And I looked at the protocol and it's actually really simple because it's ancient basically. It's got, it's got whiskers on. And so I implemented it, and it's nice because you don't have to do a receiver, you only have to do a transmitter, and I like that. So it was actually implemented in about 2 days or something. So I did that, bought myself a pager, and then spent a couple of days sending myself rude messages. DAPnet is the amateur paging network based in Germany, because it's really big in Germany. And when I started, I think DAPnet had something like 150 transmitters on it. It's now over 300. The MMDVM, like DMR and D-Star and everything else, is now the biggest POCSAG transmitters you can get out there. It's taken over again. Okay, this is where Andy, CA6JA, comes in. He's amazing, basically. He's a very clever man. He was the basis of the MMDVM hotspots, wasn't he, as you said? He's also done quite a lot for the modems, the standard modems for repeaters. He redid some of the filters for me and said, oh, hang on, that's not as good as it could be. It's like, oh, okay, thank you. He's improved that side remarkably. I've asked him to do particular jobs for me occasionally for various reasons, due to my MATLAB license running out. And along the way, he wrote some lovely little programs. Here we go, DMR to NXDN, DMR to YSF, NXDN to DMR, YSF to DMR, YSF to NXDN, and then the one that really surprises me, YSF to P25. And the reason we can do all this is not because we've got some very clever hardware. We haven't. The hardware is the same. The important thing to bear in mind is that the codec on vocoder on DMR is the same as the one used on NXDN. It is also the same one used on System Fusion DM mode. It's all the same one. There is no need for hardware. You just play with the bits of it sometimes. It's also the same one as used on DPMR, but that's not implemented. The one that surprises me is P25. P25, as defined, uses a vocoder called IMBE. Okay? It's fully documented in the TIA documentation. I think it's probably the first product from DVSI, I'm thinking, because it goes back to the early 90s. And if you get an AMB 3000 chip, you do not get IMBE on it. It's all AMBE. So I thought there was no way we could do P25 easily. It turns out that full rate AMBE is compatible with IMBE. They work perfectly together, much to my amazement. So that is why you've got YSF to P25, and they sound absolutely brilliant. So although in many ways System Fusion is quite a restricted protocol, it is good in the sense it is a great gateway protocol to other ones. From there, except for D-Star, for very good reasons, you would need extra hardware for that, you can talk from System Fusion to everything else in one way or another. And Andy took advantage of that and produced all these nice software. Also this year, when I was at Ham Radio, I borrowed a Kenwood THD74 on the proviso that I could add GPS, the THD74 GPS data to D-Star GPS data to APRS, because it's slightly incompatible with ICOM. So I borrowed that and I was able to do that in a couple of days of work, and I sent the THD74 back to ICOM, Kenwood UK, saying, thank you very much, it's a lovely radio, it really is. And thank you, it works. I sent him a screenshot of APRS.FI saying, there's your THD74 reporting my position, which was at the time near Southampton, onto APRS.FI. And I got an email back saying, excellent, thank you very much for that. And he sent me some goodies through the post. He sent me a sweatshirt, Kenwood sweatshirt, and some, nice things like that. I thought that was great. A little while later, about a month later, got an email from him. We've been talking about your work. We really like what you did. Would you like a THD74? Yes! No, yes, thank you, yes. So I now have my own THD74, so it means that if they bring out new copies of their, or new versions of their firmware, I'm able to support it without having to borrow it again. It's a lovely radio. If you're going to buy a D-Star radio, please buy one of those, they're gorgeous. They're really good, they do so much more as well. And at the same time, I received an ID 4100A from ICOM America, thanks to Ray Novak and Jim and the other Jims, having spoken to him, from the point of view of supporting ICOM terminal and access point modes, which, although it was supported by ICOM's own software, is rather poor, to be perfectly honest, and very restrictive, and ICOM understand that. It might be okay in Japan, but it's certainly not okay in US and Europe conditions. So I got sent this radio. I set about supporting it with my software. Now that was a bit more of a pig, to be honest, because it's not documented. But I was able to do it, so you can buy one of the more modern ICOM radios, plug it into my older D-Star repeater, and you can use it on your desk, with, for example, with your microphone to talk on reflectors, or as a hotspot, a la Zoom spot, albeit only for D-Star. Now then, going back to hotspots, one thing I can honestly say, I didn't see them coming. I had no inkling. I know the DV Mega existed, but I had no inkling what was going to happen. The first thing I knew about it, I think, was when I saw your photo. I think you sent me a picture initially of the Zoom spot, and then you sent me one through the post. I just couldn't believe it. This thing was how big? That long? That wide? And it did everything that the full repeater does, albeit simplex. I was just truly astonished. Little Raspberry Pi Zero below it. I mean, things like the DVAP. Obviously, it existed since 2010, 11, I suppose, maybe. And the DV Mega had also come along for D-Star only, if you remember. But this was another level. It's absolutely incredible. And this is where we must also doff our cap to Andy, CA6JAU. What he did, he basically took my firmware, sliced the front end off, which talked to the modem, and stuck a new front end on it to talk to the chip, and you suddenly get all your modes, and it looks and works the same as my full leaded repeater controller. Absolutely tremendous. And you can get simplex and duplex versions of that. So what now? Where are we going? Well, first of all, nowhere is the answer. I, for various non-amateur reasons, have very, very little time for development. I'm living back home again. I've got a new contract yet again. Being a family man again, which does take time and effort. I'm not very good at effort or time. I have no new modes planned, I'm sorry to say. If I was, it would probably be DPMR, but I don't have an itch that needs scratching, to be perfectly honest. I don't have the fire in me to do it. I have no radio for the mode anyway, which is a disadvantage. It would be the next to be done, but it's certainly not something I am chomping at the bit to do. I don't sit there at home going, oh, if I'd only got a couple of hours, I could do so much. I'm not getting that, I'm afraid. I haven't got that fire in the belly, and I do need that, to be honest. The only other protocol I could potentially do with existing hardware is called Tetrapol. You never even heard of Tetrapol, have you? No, it's very, very rare. It's used in France and Switzerland. It's used by public service, it's ancient, it's a bit rubbish, and nobody uses it apart from France and Switzerland. And so, although technically I could support it, I have absolutely no desire to do so. And the number of people who've asked me for it is precisely 0. In fact, the number of people who've asked me for DPMRs, I think about 2, so it's not exactly overflowing with support, is it? There is new hardware being developed, both by Jim and other people, both from the hotspot point of view and also from potentially IQ radios. Are you familiar with IQ? That's used with SDRs and things like that. Once you have IQ, type inputs and outputs, and if you have a linear amplifier on it, you can do any mode. Any mode. So not only can you do D star, DMR, whatever, you can do SSB and CW. And not only that, but also you can do things like, and I'm not saying this would ever be done, Tetra, which is TDMA system, 8 slot. That's what's used by public service in the whole of Europe, except for France and Switzerland.
Same time slot? Are they smaller time slots?
No, it's much wider bandwidth. It's like 50 kilohertz bandwidth. It probably wouldn't be allowed in amateur. Actually, it is used in amateur radio. It is used in Europe, but in a different mode. But Tetra, like P25 Phase 2, uses phase shift keying, and that is not compatible with anything that we can do currently, which requires essentially frequency shift keying bases. So once we have IQ radios, P25 Phase 2, which has had precisely 0 requests for, I might add, although I have been asked about Tetra, that becomes possible. I'm not saying it's going to ever be done, but it becomes possible. The way is clear. And also, of course, FM. Goes without saying, I've skimmed over FM, you might notice. I'm not going to go there. But that's the next generation. So instead of people finding old radios like Motorola GM340s and Tate TM810s, you'd actually be able to buy a radio, brand new, hopefully for not a lot of money, which can do everything you want and do it really, really well. That's what we'd like to do, and therefore you wouldn't be down to the vagaries of finding second-hand radios that might have been abused. Oh gosh, come to the end at last.
You may want to just comment. It's at no time soon.
No time soon, I think is the best way of putting it as well. Okay, so there we go. That's the end of it. I think I've hopefully filled my time slot, and yeah, that's it. And some. Sorry about that.